Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here at my next YouTube video, and this is going to be my next Star Wars movie review. And obviously, as you can probably tell, what I'm going to be reviewing today is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, the first of the original trilogy movies, the first Star Wars movie to be released, in fact, way back in 1977. So, I am actually reviewing a 36-year-old movie today, so that's pretty impressive, I think, that it's kind of held up so good. And I'll start off by saying, once again, I do prefer the prequel trilogy than the original trilogy. And I'll get into that more, but, I just do want to say that I did actually see these original movies before I saw any of the prequel films, so the whole thing of, I grew up with the prequels isn't really, this kind of nostalgia kind of defense thing. I just honestly think that the prequels are better movies than the original trilogy overall. As a group of three movies, I prefer them, and suits me better in terms of the style of movie I like. But I'm gonna get into this now. I think overall the reason that I prefer the prequel movies to the original trilogy is that there is I almost find the original trilogy movies too simple, straightforward. The plot is almost too basic. That kind of worked for the opening few Star Wars movies, introducing the concept that he had these kind of more straightforward stories. It's good versus evil, and it's clear that the guy dressed in the black armor is the evil guy, and that the farm boy who kind of finds out about his destiny is the hero. It's just completely straightforward. But then when you go into episode 1, comparing the first movie of each trilogy, you have the Jedi, you have this political kind of situation there, and the Jedi are kind of working for the Republic, and they have the Trade Federation in the background, the Sith in the background. So it's a bit more complicated, and it kind of suits me and my film style kind of better, that you have all these things going on in the background, and you're kind of not quite sure what's going on, and then ultimately, as the prequel trilogy progresses, you kind of find out that the Jedi aren't really doing things the best they could be, and the kind of black and white thing isn't so simple anymore. It's kind of this more grey area. So then you come to the original trilogy, and it's really obvious kind of who's meant to be the good and who's meant to be the bad, and there's not much kind of grey there. It's very straightforward, and it works, as I said, for these movies, but at the same time, I think people don't give the prequel movies enough credit for pulling off a fairly complex kind of story compared to the more simplistic story in these. So I'll get into episode 4 now, A New Hope. I think the best place to start off is with Luke at the start. We obviously saw him at the end of Revenge of the Sith being brought by Obi-Wan to Emperor Uncle Owen. And from here, obviously he goes up there, and he's not told about his father, or where he comes from, his kind of destiny, that sort of thing. But at the start of this movie, you see that Luke actually wants to kind of spread out there, do something. He's kind of destined for something more. In this case, he wants to join the kind of Imperial Academy. But before that can happen, obviously the events of the Tantive 4 cause CPO and R2-D2 to kind of crash to Earth to save the Death Star plans, and this is where kind of it happens. The Stormtroopers arrive, obviously his uncle and aunt come into the line of fire, they're killed, and this forces Obi-Wan to maybe accelerate his plans, start training Luke before it would have been planned, and he's just kind of thrust into this kind of you are destined to be a Jedi, this whole thing. And that works as the start of a hero's kind of journey, and you really feel for Luke, but at the same time realize that he's destined for more than this. You see Luke using Anakin's lightsaber, and it's yes, this works. And the whole thing of Obi-Wan kind of lying to Luke about this, he's saying that, yeah, your father was the best star pilot in the galaxy, he fought in the Clone Wars, he was like a brother to me, my best friend. But not saying that, he was ultimately, became Darth Vader, but that he was killed by Darth Vader, which is true from a certain point of view, which is like Obi-Wan Ben's catchphrase in this movie, and that's great. And then from there, that's where like Han Solo comes into play when they're looking for a way to get to Alderaan because of the message they saw, and that Obi-Wan's requested by Leia, which is where Leia comes into play. So this movie really nicely sets up the main kind of cast of characters, um, in terms of like, oh, it's Luke and Ben at the start. They then meet Chewbacca and Han Solo. They then go to rescue the princess, and then they become the heroes and stuff like that. You have Luke, who's the one who wants to be the hero, Han, who's the one who doesn't really want to do it for like the rewards and stuff like this. So it's a really kind of nice cast of characters set up, and you know what I think I really like about it is that Obi-Wan as the Jedi kind of goes with this plan. Like he hears the kind of call from Princess Leia, like Bail Organa's daughter, and instantly kind of goes to like help, and especially like when they then find Han, and all that sort of stuff. Alderaan is destroyed kind of as this happens, and you see Obi-Wan get this huge feeling that, oh, something horrible has happened. They now have the most powerful weapon in the universe. And that's a big moment, and it like worked. Which obviously leads to then the rescue attempt of Princess Leia, where basically all the cast kind of come together, and Obi-Wan kind of goes off on his own. Now, I think the Obi-Wan Darth Vader conflict that comes up here is arguably one of the most important scenes in probably all of Star Wars. And I like what happens, the ultimate goal. Like, on paper, I like what happens in this scene. My problem is the execution of the lightsaber fight here. Like, I understand that the way they had to film this was that they had really fragile kind of sword things because of the way they had to do the lightsaber effect. They basically had this kind of motor thing in the hilt of the blade, and so the actual like blade part of the lightsaber was super fragile because of this, and they couldn't really kind of do that much with it. But it just didn't really work as this kind of like secondary conflict of Obi-Wan and Anakin, basically. Like, yes, you have that Obi-Wan's so much older now. Darth Vader's basically can't move that much anymore. But when you have that Darth Vader's basically doing some pretty crazy stuff in episode 5 and 6, it kind of doesn't work here. And Obi-Wan, a Jedi, has the Force, could arguably do something along the lines of Yoda. He obviously has the Force. He probably could have done something a bit more agile. So in that sense, like, this fight could have been so much better, I think. But overall, I think it worked. It was fine. The lightsaber fight is not really the important aspect of that scene, though I think it is a bit of a flaw with the scene. And the main goal of this is that Obi-Wan here doesn't really care if he kind of lives or dies. He's kind of here to show that, there's more to kind of power than just like brute strength, that if you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you'll ever know. And so, even before the blade makes contact with kind of Obi-Wan, or just as it does, he basically becomes one with the Force, the thing that Qui-Gon figured out how to do, kind of in the background of kind of like Revenge of the Sith after he died. That's really good, and that he was taught it kind of by a mixture of Yoda and Qui-Gon, and you just have like Darth Vader shocked at what happens here, and this obviously distracts Vader enough for the rest of them to escape, having got the princess back. So Obi-Wan's kind of last moments not only put this kind of doubt in Darth Vader's mind, but also gave Luke, who's the kind of big hope of the Jedi now, a chance to kind of go forward as well. So a great ending, I suppose, to Obi-Wan's kind of life before the Force, or something like that, before as a Force ghost. It's good. And obviously then they flee, and you have these characters who don't really know each other that well. Like, you have Luke going from following, like, Ben. He was the one who introduced him to Han, and, like, none of them, these three, kind of Han, Leia, and Luke, don't really know each other that well, and they're forced to kind of create this bond through the rescue attempt, and then from there, kind of arriving on kind of the Yavin base as you go into the end kind of scenes of the movie. Him obviously Han getting his reward, and like Han as a character, I think is that classic rebel character, and in many ways, he helps make the movie a bit more, add something extra to it. That you have this guy who's not on either side really. He's not good, not bad, but kind of at his base level is the good guy. You know, he has a kind of bone to pick with the Empire for like all the stuff they've done with regards to his smuggling, that sort of thing. And so ultimately, like, he tries to not create any like attachments, relationships really with Leia or Luke. So he kind of leaves, but ultimately comes back in the end because he realizes that, you know, this is kind of where I need to be, and that's a really nice character arc for Han to have, I think, as well. And then um, obviously the final kind of moments of this are just amazing. I love the kind of end space battle here that we have as the Death Star is primed to fire on the Yavin base, as the rebels launch their attack on the Death Star, having analysed the run. So the overall plot of this movie, while super simple and like basic, works. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. I just there could have been a lot more, I think, to it, because I'll probably get into that a bit more after I go through this scene. But for now, the scene itself, you obviously have Luke pretty much for the first time in a like proper like fighter in an X-wing, and he instantly knows kind of what to do. So like it's not like he's like refused to go on this mission. He's given the respect because of like Biggs kind of speaks up for him near the end of the movie, and they go out. And ultimately, you kind of see his kind of almost hidden force talents come into play here, as probably more experienced pilots than him are like shot down during the battle, but he with the force is kind of like staying in the battle, and you have the initial kind of failed near close kind of call with the Death Star being destroyed, the kind of thing missed. And what I really love about the movie is the targeting computer thing. The way they really make an effort in going like, oh, you need to use your targeting computer to do all this, and you know the number counting down, the lines getting closer as they kind of go down the trench. You know, you have the Empire kind of putting more and more fighters out there, the turrets firing, that sort of thing. The rebel forces gradually getting kind of whittled down to basically only Luke left against Darth Vader and his kind of wingman, and then Han comes in, and it's just this amazing reunion. Like, you know, let's blow this thing and go home, kid. And it's just like, then the whole like Ben coming through the Force to tell Luke to like turn off the targeting computer, use the Force here, just like to make this whole thing of like you have to be a Jedi here. And then that moment of like, why should you turn off your targeting computer? It's never gonna work, and he gets it, and it's just a really nice and perfect way to end this movie, and very reminiscent of the Attack of the Phantom Menace kind of scene with like what Anakin does. So they're both responsible for blowing up something pretty big, and then that's obviously a nice connection. And you know, so overall, though, this movie has a lot of things that it does good. Like, I'm very positive about this movie. Um, the one maybe complaint I suppose I'd have is that they could have actually probably done something else. They could have done a side plot with the political side of things, because Leia is a senator in the Galactic Empire. Now, obviously it's an empire. The Senate doesn't really do anything. It's basically Palpatine making all the decisions. But in the background, you have the fact that Bail Organa, who was the senator of Alderaan before Leia, has basically been supporting the Rebel Alliance, but in the Senate supporting Emperor Palpatine to kind of keep the kind of trail kind of cold for him. And so, you know, you do have this kind of political aspect in the background, the fact that like blowing up Alderaan, where Bail Organa's from, Leia's planet that she's a senator of, is this kind of huge thing. Like, they've basically just blown up this opposition thing, and it makes the Empire look terrible, basically. So I kind of would have liked a bit more kind of political aspects in this, because it was such an important part of the prequel trilogy, the political aspect, and if it were just to almost completely disappear in this movie was odd, especially when your main character is a senator. Like, we had Padme, Leia's mother, who she doesn't quite know yet, um, being a senator and having political stuff and action, while with Leia here, you don't really have any. Throughout the whole movie, you don't really see her do anything like political, really, when she probably like should have, especially like with I suppose what's expected of her position going into the new trilogy of movies 7, 8, 9. So, you know, that's interesting. Um, in terms of like the other characters, I suppose getting into them more, C3PO and R2D2. I think George Lucas has gone on record as saying that like the reason that they're the only kind of characters who appear in like all of the movies is basically because they're droids. They're kind of just recording all of this footage, and they just happen to be there, and it's just a interesting way of making the universe kind of work. That droids are the ones that kind of last a long time as opposed to the characters, and it's just interesting here seeing where they go from like that one line in Revenge of the Sith, like, I'm putting these two droids in your care, to where they are now. Like, R2D2 is the one that hasn't had his memory banks wiped, while C3PO kind of has, and he has no idea what R2D2 is talking about half of the time. It really works, and stuff like all these little moments, I suppose, of say R2D2 becoming Luke's kind of like partner, in terms of like he's the one in the X-wing with Luke, just like he was always with Anakin. Like that, those connections really work in this movie. And then I suppose I haven't really talked about Darth Vader, but what an entrance in like the opening scene of the movie, basically. And he just makes it clear that he is pretty much the best villain of any movie of all time. Just the design, what he does, and stuff like that. Just cutting down his mentor in that fight, even though he didn't as such kind of kill him. It was more of Obi-Wan kind of releasing himself to the Force. But the fact that Darth Vader would have went through it anyway, and stuff like that. And even there's a sense of the tragedy of the story of Anakin in this movie as well, because Darth Vader, as much as he's like a huge part of the Empire, is actually answering to Grand Moff Tarkin in this movie. Like, Tarkin kind of has this control over Darth Vader, as well as like both of them talking always down to the Emperor as well. So there's that kind of sense that like Darth Vader was meant to be like the second guy in charge of the Empire, but because of what happened to him, he's basically been demoted to like the kind of third or fourth in command. And there's a kind of sense of a tragedy there that's probably more explored in the book Darth Lord of the Sith, which takes place after Revenge of the Sith, than it is here. And I felt they maybe could have done something a bit more here, but the obvious story was that you don't get well, what's the best way to say this? The story is really that you don't have any sense of the humanity of Darth Vader until the very end of Episode 6. So that works, I think. So I've probably come pretty much to the end of the movie here now, and as I said, this movie in a way has a double-edged sword of its plot being so simple. Good in that it's executed like really well. The whole thing works really well. Kind of bad in that because it's so simple, that Star Wars is a complex kind of universe. So like there is all this stuff, and the prequel trilogy shows that. But this just kind of doesn't get into a lot of the stuff in the background. I think it says a lot that in the prequel reviews, I could talk for, say, 10 minutes about the actual movie, and 10 minutes about the stuff that's hinted at that kind of goes on in the background, and that the movie just about tells you enough to get some discussion out of. While with this movie, the only thing I can really focus on is what the movie actually shows you, and there's little bits in the background, but there's not really enough to kind of have a huge amount of discussion on. And so that's kind of one of those things where like I like when a movie has there's something more to discuss to it, and just I find the prequels have a lot more of that than in this one. So I think overall that's my complaint, and even that is not a huge complaint. Like I really like this movie; it's one of my favorite movies. All the Star Wars movies are, but I like a bit more complexity in my movies. So if I was to rank this in terms of the 6 Star Wars movies, this would be my 4th favorite Star Wars movie. I've said that Revenge of the Sith is my favorite. I've said that The Phantom Menace is my 2nd favorite. I've said that Attack of the Clones would be my 6th favorite. I've said that this is my 4th favorite. So all that's left is my 3rd and 5th favorite between 5 and 6. So next week I will be reviewing Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. I'm looking forward to it because it is a pretty important movie in probably cinema history, so that's going to be interesting. I'll try and get the review out sometime around Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Just depends on how things go. So thank you for watching this review, and bye.